Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the official countdown of the top 10 worst college football performances of 2022. Now, guys, because it is tough to measure other positions, this will just be based on quarterbacks, the 10 single worst performances according to ESPN metrics. We're going to count down from number 10 to number 1. Look over all these guys' terrible stats. These are just specific games. It's just a one-game sample. Who's played the worst in a single game? These are the official 10 worst performances, starting with number 10, and it's Utah State's quarterback Logan Bonner in a game against Weber State. Yes, the FCS team. They lost 35-7, and he went 12 of 31, 120 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He had a grand total QBR of 1.0. Now, you might be wondering, how does an individual with a QBR of a 1.0 not be higher on this list? Well, it's because actually, when it comes to his rushing, he only had one attempt for -1 yard, so he didn't get sacked or anything like that. And in terms of like yards per play, which is kind of how I'm basing this off of an ESPN metric, he comes in at number 10 on the list. You can take a look at the box score of this game. Weber State, legitimately a good FCS team, guys. There's a lot of FCS teams that could jump to the FBS level like we saw James Madison do, and honestly probably go 5-7 or something like that. Yes, they're not terrible. So you can see this game. Utah State was horrible this year. The most notable thing I remember about Utah State was actually before the season. I believe their first game, well, actually they played in week 0, and then Alabama's first game was against Utah State. I think that's what it is, and they shut Utah State out. That is the most memorable moment of Utah State's season. Maybe last week you could say they played on Black Friday against Boise State and got crushed. Either way, Utah State not good this year. Really bad performance. It comes in at number 10. Moving to number 9, and it's got to be Brendan Armstrong. Now, he appeared on my list for the top 5 worst players in college football. He comes in at number 9 for this performance against Illinois. 13 of 32, 180 yards, averaging right around 5.5 yards per attempt. 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, an impressive QBR of 12.6. But the main issue for Brendan, the 11 carries. Well, actually, I guess it's a big issue when you only complete like 30% of your passes, but also the 11 carries for -9 yards. At least he had a long run of 12. He did have a long run of 12. But taking a look at this game, guys, I remember this. Week 2, I thought Virginia was an underrated sleeper team. Brendan Armstrong coming off a 31 passing touchdown season. And my goodness, this started the narrative that Virginia sucks. Brendan Armstrong, unfortunately, sucks. And Illinois actually is going to have a good season. Nobody thought Illinois was going to have a good season. This kind of opened the potential gates for it. Because remember, Illinois opened the year and they beat Wyoming on week 0, and then they lost to Indiana. And we all kind of thought, yeah, they suck. We knew they were one of, if not the worst teams in the Big Ten. Then they come back and they beat Virginia, a team that I thought was at least going to be good on offense. They hold them to 3 points. And that kind of started that narrative. So Brendan Armstrong in this performance, just horrible. He comes in at number 9 on the list. Moving to number 8, it's going to be Emmett Moorhead, the backup quarterback for Boston College, in his Week 12 game against Notre Dame in the snow. 9 of 22, 117 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And you know what? He had a QBR to match the number of interceptions he threw. That's bonus points. A 3.0 QBR. That's better than my GPA, I'll tell you that much. And then Emmett Moorhead, the 8 carries for -23 yards. Yeah, that's not helping things, son. That's not going to help. But guys, this game against Notre Dame, it was a decapitation. It was 37-0 at halftime. I mean, my goodness. I remember we were talking about this game, and I said, listen, take Boston College plus 20.5. It's good value. The analytics say to take Boston College, and obviously that did not work out. Notre Dame blitzkriegs Boston College, and then they just sit on the ball the entire second half. It could have been a lot worse, but this was that snow game. Yeah, I think this game was happening during the Ohio State-Maryland. That Ohio State-Maryland game was torture. I think this is when that game was happening, but Notre Dame ends up winning 44-0. That game was recently, just a few weeks ago. That performance comes in at number 8 on the list. Moving to number 7, we're going to go with Aiden O'Connell. His performance against Iowa, this happening week number 10, so recently, 20 of 43, 168, averaging under 4 yards per attempt. Of course, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, the QBR under 17, and it's not helping matters, the 4 carries for negative 26 yards. This game really defined a lot of... I guess, you know what? It really doesn't matter anymore because Purdue is in the Big Ten championship game, but this game definitely shocked a lot of people when Iowa won, because there was kind of a belief that Iowa's offense was so bad, they was just going to hold them back so much. They go into West Lafayette and just completely shut down Purdue, and their offense kind of resurrects a little bit, and that's the whole narrative. Iowa possibly was going to make the Big Ten championship game. Of course, they had a chance to. Then they lost to Nebraska at home, so it is unfortunate, but Iowa wins this game 24-3. Aiden O'Connell, it is a miserable game. Hopefully he can fare better this weekend in the Big Ten championship game against Michigan. He comes in at number 7 on my list. Moving to number 6. And guys, what can I say? It's Brennan Armstrong again. For his performance against Pittsburgh in week number 11, 17 of 32, 152 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, a QBR of 9.8. He also added, if you want to say added, 10 carries for negative 46 yards. But guys, of course, this game was very special. The first 2 plays of this game were both pick sixes thrown by Brennan Armstrong. And Pittsburgh was up 28-0 in the first quarter. So it is remarkable. You can see there the overall 14-55, a pick six, 14-44, another pick six. And then Pittsburgh scored another touchdown with 8 minutes left. They were up 21-0, 8 minutes left in the first quarter. Just a total annihilation for Virginia at home. And sadly for Virginia, kind of a sad backstory. That was their last game of the season. They ended up canceling their last 2 games due to the unfortunate shooting that happened there. So we certainly pray for them and things like that. But, this was not a good game for Brennan Armstrong. He comes in at number 6 on the list. Moving to number 5. It's going to be Miles Kendrick, the New Mexico quarterback. And guys, New Mexico's offense was so bad. They had 2 different quarterbacks that are going to be in the top 5 for the worst performance of the season. Miles Kendrick takes this one, week number 2 against Boise State. Not horrible, 41-13 loss, 31-14. I mean, that's not a horrible margin. You can see the numbers for Kendrick. What really hurt him was the 9 of 28. You can't have 28 pass attempts and get under 100 yards. But you know what? We got to respect this kid. He had 1 touchdown and no interceptions, but still a QBR under 7. Again, if you have 28 pass attempts and you're under 100 yards, that is impossibly bad. And then he adds 12 carries for negative 30 yards. I don't think that's helping things, son. That's not going to help. No. You can take a look at this game. Again, not horrible, although it does look like New Mexico scored 2 garbage time touchdowns when they were already getting crushed. They were getting shut out through 3 quarters. Boise State had kind of a weird season where they started off really bad. Then they fired their offensive coordinator, and their QB went into the transfer portal, and then they played better. So who knows, guys, but definitely not a good performance there for Miles Kendrick. Moving to number 4 on the worst performances of 2022, it is Emory Jones. Emory Jones is at an interesting... I remember when Emory Jones was committed to Ohio State, and then he flipped to, I believe, Florida, and then he hit the transfer portal, and now he's at Arizona State, and he had a game against Utah earlier this year in week 4, 21 of 36, 261. 261 yards isn't horrible. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 10.1 QBR. And then he had 11 carries for negative 26 yards. So Emory Jones against the tough Utah defense. That's a blowout loss for sure. But I've got to stick up for Emory Jones here. I think, it was not a good performance, but I don't think it was one of the worst. Again, this is an ESPN metric that I'm using. He comes in at number 4 in his 34-13 loss, 2 interceptions, negative 26 rushing yards. Moving to number 3. It is another New Mexico quarterback, and it is CJ Montez, who got shut out in week 13. So this just happened at Colorado State. They lost 17-0, 12 of 27, 62 yards. We do respect no interceptions. Unfortunately for him, averaging 2.3 yards per attempt. That's not going to get it done, son. That's not good enough. The QBR, not even at 2. Hey, at least my GPA is better than that, I'll tell you that. And then he also had the 8 carries for negative 44 yards, averaging minus 5.5 yards per carry. And he had a long rush of 0 yards. Looking at this game, 17-0. This is your typical November Mountain West football, guys. I say it every year. And make sure next year, especially like in weeks 11, weeks 12, weeks 13, always bet the under in the cold Mountain West games. These teams just simply can't score. They just cannot score. It's cold. They're miserable. They want to go home. They don't care. This is what we get. This is the result of that. 17-0. Colorado State. Amazing defense. Amazing. Moving to the number 2 spot, and this is the biggest name on the list. It's Anthony Richardson and his week 2 performance against Kentucky. 14 of 35, 143 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a QBR of 2.6. And this was really Florida's shining moment here. He also added 6 carries for 4 yards. So at least he's in the positives. He is, we respect that. We do respect that from Anthony. Taking a look at this game, this was it for Florida. I think they started the season unranked. They beat Utah at home. You've got the dual threat, interesting quarterback. How good is he? He doesn't have a lot of experience. And then you lay an egg against what turned out to be a very average Kentucky team. And immediately you are thrown out of any sort of SEC contention. So Florida had a really weird start to their schedule. I think their first 3 games were all home games at 7 o'clock. Kind of a fun fact there, but Anthony Richardson, the second worst, and I have to agree with it, just in terms of the situation, you got to be better than that. I mean, that is a terrible, terrible performance, and a good win for Kentucky, for sure. Not that it really mattered, because they didn't have a very good season themselves, but there can only be one. And the single worst game by any quarterback, it has to be Billy Atkins, the James Madison QB, against that suffocating Marshall defense. 13 of 35, 164 yards. He did throw a touchdown, 4 interceptions, and he had a QBR of 3.3. He also had 13 carries for negative 23 yards. It's unfortunate, and guys, it's very clear the interceptions really hurt him in terms of the overall metrics ranks. James Madison, we remember when they were 5-0. They got ranked. It was crazy going from FCS to FBS. Then they immediately lose to Georgia Southern, and then they get crushed by Marshall. Kind of a weird game. They were beating Marshall 12-2 at the end of the first quarter, and then they get shut out the rest of the game. And it's very clear Billy Atkins and his performance did not help matters. So he takes the crown as the single worst QB performance of 2022. And you know what? There might have been a worse performance at wide receiver, running back, maybe a cornerback that gave up 500 yards, but I really can't measure that, so we're just going by QBs. But guys, that's going to do it for this top 10 list of the official worst performances for college football in 2022. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.